All right, that should do it.
We're recording now?
We're going to start streaming here in Oh, yeah, it's starting. All right, I'm going to play this song. Yeah, we're going on, but I'm gonna just play this for a second so people can come in.
Okay.
All right, as that's getting started, as that's kind of getting done, still going to try to get people in here, get somebody, but so this is the first thing I'm doing on this channel. One of the things that I've been wanting to do for a long time is find some kind of a podcast style discussion with me, a friend, or just in general. And even though I don't do a lot of live streams, I like just talking with people, talking about a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be Dragon Ball, the Saw franchise, just horror movies in general, just anything. It could be anything and everything, and that's what this channel is all about. So pure live stream channel, more of a podcast discussion type thing, and set up with either me and a guest talking for a bit and then answering any questions. So because this is the first one, I don't really anticipate anyone watching straight up, so it's just going to be like a discussion between me and my guest. And that's really all I have to say about that. You guys saw the title, you saw the thumbnail. Today we're going to be talking about the end of Game of Thrones, the waning popularity of The Walking Dead, the rise of streaming networks, the cutting of cable, and the just ever-expanding niche market of television and consumer products. So with that being said, like, what is the next Game of Thrones? What's the next big television juggernaut? And with that, I'm going to introduce my guest. He's never been a part of any of my channels before, but I hope you guys are, when you find this later, I hope you guys give him a warm welcome. Matt Stryker, one of my friends, one of my, I guess, work employee, not employees, not work friends, it's whatever. He helped me
LLC together.
Yeah, no, he helped me, one of the producers on the film that I've worked on, and we had a lot of fun. I've been telling him to get into YouTube and all this stuff. I think he has a good voice for it, a good face for it. If he wants to show it at some point during this, if I can get my computer to do that. But anyway, Matt, I've said enough. Why don't you say hello? For anyone who's either going to jump in here or will be watching this later.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I am all of the things Mark listed. Matt Stryker. I am, simply put, a filmmaker, videographer, director, writer, editor, AD, lots of hats, do photography as well. General lover of stories. I am remarkably ill-equipped for a lot of the discussion points that Mark listed out at the top, but I am going to contribute opinions anyway, because that's what the internet is for.
I think that's the best thing about the internet. And you know what's weird? Before we get into this, like, so we were hanging out not this past weekend, but the weekend before that, and you were like, I like your stuff, but I don't, I'm paraphrasing. I don't think you really said that. But
Put words in your mouth, Mark.
well, you were telling me about my Twitter account and everything, and saying how everything has to be one way or the other. There's no middle ground anymore when it comes to the internet. And I think that's true, and that's one of the things I would like to avoid, and that's why I like this channel idea, because it's so what's the word for it? It's very
Casual?
yeah, it's casual. It's a long form discussion. You don't have to boil things down. You can explain yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. There's less need for a mic drop when you're able to talk for an hour rather than on 140 characters.
Exactly, or 280 now that Twitter is.
I live in the
itself. But all right, let's jump right into this discussion topic, and it's something that really I feel like this is something that is going to become a much further reaching discussion topic in the near future. Now that Game of Thrones is done and HBO is scrambling really to find the next big thing, and it really feels like everybody is trying to find the next big thing. What is the next Game of Thrones, right?
You know, I know the when that finale aired, like attached to it right after were 5 minutes of "Please don't unsubscribe" from our channel. Like they were just showing like, we got the Leftovers guys back, and they're doing Watchmen, and we got Lin-Manuel Miranda with a big polar bear, and all these other things, and it's they really want you to know they have got content fucking coming, but nobody knows what takes off, and you know, I've been hearing HBO is really struggling against like, you know, things like Netflix and Hulu, and that's unfortunate because I do associate HBO largely with a quality level that even when they miss, I admire the miss. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Netflix is just able to churn out so many things that it truly feels sometimes like irrelevant how good it is, as long as it is just making the catalog more dense.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't compete with that money.
Well, speaking of the money, they said that Netflix spent, what was it, $12 billion last year just on content alone, and they're expected to spend 15 this year just to, like you said, create a catalog that's going to be there and outlast anything. And at the same time, as HBO took the time after Game of Thrones to really push and promote some of the bigger shows they have coming out this year, when they usually just have the writers and everyone talk about the episodes, it's interesting that they're trying so hard, and everyone's trying so hard to be their own thing and to not, I guess, create a gathering place or one unique streaming service that's going to have everything like Netflix tried to be and started trying to be. Everyone wants to be HBO now. We want to have our own content. We don't want to be bound to anybody. But the problem is in order to make that happen, you don't have years. Like HBO has decades worth of content, even though in comparison now, Netflix makes it look like a joke in terms of new, original, and interesting content for the most part, but very few people are watching that stuff.
I also want to say I obviously enjoy plenty of shows that are on Netflix. I'm not like I'm not like I'll never log on individual for Netflix, but I would say this might be short-sighted of me, but I don't think any shows on Netflix command conversation in the same way that something like a Game of Thrones would. And obviously there's something like Stranger Things, but even Stranger Things, which in my mind is probably their loudest success, it kind of commands the conversation in the way closer to like how a movie commands a conversation, like a very, like a couple of weeks of, you know, conversation. But I do think that week to week element that something like HBO does is able to build a fandom in a different way, in a more sustained way. Whereas Stranger Things, I feel, as the example I gave, is kind of like at most a summer conversation or a text. I just got it.
You're being too loud. No.
I'm sorry. And it is a text saying that someone is irritated with me. Haha.
No, I no. If you would continue, because I think I understand where you're going, and I think that's a really interesting discussion topic when it comes to what's big on television, what's going to be the future of television.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess when you pitched me this topic as a talking point in general, one of the things I definitely wanted to talk about or try and make an arbitrary list of is like what defines event television, like Game of Thrones. What makes Game of Thrones different to the typical conversation? Because it's not like we don't have passionate TV conversations every year, but there really is nothing I've seen like Game of Thrones. In terms of just, I don't know, what's the word when it's all around? It's omnipresent. Like when the weeks Game of Thrones is on, it is the conversation, shared slightly with NBA Finals right now. But even then, it's like, get out of the way, Bucks. I need to learn about my dragons. I need to know. I need to see what we're disappointed about right now, which is a whole separate conversation. And yes, I am amongst the many irritated with this last season, although also not. But that's not even the conversation we're having.
Well, it's part of it. I think that can definitely be part of it. But I wanted to wrap around just briefly about what you were saying about. I want to wrap around just
everybody in advance. For tangents left and right.
About this discussion that you were having about, or at least this discussion that you were bringing up about Stranger Things as its most or its loudest success probably ever.
Mm-hmm. And still relatively young. Like we have no idea what Netflix's final form is because it is.
This isn't even my final form.
This is Majin Buu's still fat. he hasn't spit himself out or eaten himself yet. So I watch Dragon Ball Z. You see, Mark, I can be on your channel.
It's possible, but okay. I think that's a really well made point though, because Stranger Things is, and Netflix's model really is, bulk excitement.
Mm-hmm.
The weeks or even a month leading up to it, but it doesn't even feel like that. Almost immediately, as soon as it drops, everyone gets incredibly excited for anything that they put out there, and then afterwards, within a weekend, it can be irrelevant. And I think that's an interesting. I think that's an interesting model for them. And we were talking about how they're spending billions of dollars on content, and it almost seems like and feels like they have to put out something big, something that you want to watch, or at least enough people want to watch every single week. But they only have a couple dominant programs that I feel, at least in my circles, people watch and talk about. You got Stranger Things, BoJack Horseman, obviously most people watch. Now House of Cards is ending, even though a lot of people gave up on that show a long time ago. Orange is the New Black is ending as well. And then what could you, maybe you and the Umbrella Academy apparently has a huge following, or at least a huge fan base. So I think in terms of anything on Netflix, even though they seem to be trying and spending a ton of money, the way that their model works, none of their shows are built in the same way that Game of Thrones or The Walking Dead are. They're not as consistent, and it doesn't take weeks, months, or even a year to get through them. I
Hmm.
mean, you just basically watch it and then you're waiting for the next season, and it takes an entire year. It doesn't feel like there's a communal way of watching Netflix content.
For sure. Even like shows I love, I can't say how many times I hear the discussion basically being like, "Oh my God, it's been a year." It's going to be a year till I can take this in. Uh, yeah, and even some of the shows you listed in that example, like I mean, I love BoJack, but BoJack, is certainly niche. It's something that's cynical, or not cynical, but I mean, occasionally cynical, definitely dark. Just like that is alienating in a way that could never take off in the same way. And I
Hmm.
feel like, you know, if you're basing the reaction off of memes and shared things, BoJack has certainly a passionate base, and people like to interview the creator and actors, but it doesn't like that is a small fanfare. House of Cards, I feel like House of Cards and Orange is the New Black. I felt I hopped off both those shows, and I'm by no means an indicator of what where the culture is at with something, but it became way less of a priority.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like the conversation really, if the conversation was as passionate as when I was in it, then I probably would feel more motivated to be a part of it. But I see the conversations wane as the show's still going. I'm not personally the biggest fan of. I like the first few seasons of Orange is the New Black. House of Cards hit or miss for me, and there's just so much. Netflix is giving me too many options. I get to say no at a certain point. Um, and Stranger Things does feel, you know, different. I feel like a success that Netflix had different from Stranger Things. Closest thing I saw personally was the hit they had with "To All the Boys I Loved Before," which again is a movie, but
Hmm.
I sustained conversation. There was a very passionate, long-held thing, and even that was like a few months right at its release, like a little before, right after. Uh, but that held, and it's getting a sequel. And they even treat Stranger Things kind of as a, the story is very much like just chapters of a big narrative. So it feels like a movie. Its conversation feels like a movie. Even cut me off at any point, but it's
Hmm.
something kind of akin to what Endgame is at. I feel like already the conversation of Endgame is kind of just about numbers rather than. I feel like we've had every opinion about Endgame that we were going to have, and now we're just seeing if it's going to beat Avatar, which it doesn't seem like it's going to.
It might. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
maybe.
a whole nother topic.
Yeah,
I
be on
well,
track.
no. This is about just having a conversation, just trying to have fun. I wanted to go back on that because you're talking about their sustained success with things like To All the Boys I've Loved Before and to Stranger Things, and the way that Netflix's model is in terms of becoming the next big show or the next big thing. And I'm wondering, even though this kind of goes against what they've been trying to do as they evolve, you get to see. Oh, and it also says, like you were talking about, how Netflix is still in its first form, or at least it's still growing as a network. And it's interesting too because recently there's been a lot of different studies about Netflix and what Netflix is bringing to the table and whether or not they're going to be able to sustain their market share as Disney Plus comes out. And there's a lot of things I want to talk about in Disney Plus and whether or not those shows are going to take off in a major way.
Mhm.
But Disney, but Netflix, they're starting to trickle out with numbers now. And for a long time, it was a long held belief that they weren't ever going to do this. They weren't going to be put in the same corners as cable network television or something. It doesn't matter how many people are watching. We're putting content out there that's going to stay on our network for as long as we're in existence because we own it and people can go and find it at their leisure. We're not going to cancel many shows, and there's going to be resolutions to almost everything that we put out there. And lo and behold, that model didn't change. That model just did not go very well. Because while Orange is the New Black even though it's still very fairly popular amongst Netflix fans, they're going to the wayside. People aren't talking about it or nearly as excited about it as they used to be. Obviously, everyone knows and has seen, or at least has heard, what happened to House of Cards.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting to cancel shows now much more than ever. They canceled all the Marvel shows for probably one reason or another. Maybe it has something to do with Disney, maybe it doesn't. But they also cancel shows like the ones that I liked, even though they're not a very big show, like Santa Carlita Diet. That's a hilarious, really fun show. I think it deserved a fourth season, but they decided to give it the axe anyway, probably because it cost too much. You have Timothy Oliphant and Drew Barrymore, probably cost a lot to produce that television show. Is it possible, now that they're starting to show numbers, now that they're trying to sell their stuff, or at least show that they're different, but they're still different, but they're going to start adhering to some of the more traditional bedrocks of television, like showing defined ratings, like how many people are watching The Blind Spot, or not The Blind Spot. Well, it's another the Bird Box, another blind movie with Sandra Bullock.
Ugh, I hated that. Sorry. But that's not the point.
Is it possible that they're going to change their dynamic where the television shows that they put out are more like movies? Where, I mean, can you imagine a system where they shoot 3 or 4 episodes of Stranger Things that are hour and a half long, and then they put them out every single quarter or every couple months, where it's a sustained excitement waiting for the season to end, but you don't get it all at once? Would that help or hurt?
Doing that, or are you just hypothesizing?
I'm hypothesizing. If every episode of Stranger Things was released 2 or 3 months from each other in a single year, like any normal television show, but they're more like movies than episodes of television, would that help or hurt?
Well, because I definitely know. I don't know. That'd be interesting. I feel like Stranger Things is like a little sidebar to that, but Stranger Things is also interesting because those kids keep getting older and more successful, and I they're gonna be able to take hold. I feel like that kind of turnaround, production wise, is gotta be tough to keep up with. Because.
Well, theoretically, you shoot it just like you shoot a television show, but you'd have to create a sustained narrative. That's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. They're already having a hard time with that 2 seasons in. I mean, like, honestly, and I'm actually more of a fan of the second season than the first, personally. But that is definitely a critique they've gotten. And season 3 seems to be like a whole different tone to the first 2. So I mean, what's your question again? It just like, do you think if they've spaced them out like kind of movies, like Marvel movies almost, like where we get 2 or 3 a year?
Yeah, exactly.
That would be
or 4 or something. I mean, the episodes themselves are over an hour. Just recut them.
Mm-hmm.
If it would work that way.
I feel like to do that, you would need to get an audience accustomed to just a different expectation. I could see a world where Stranger Things becomes kind of like its spin-off movies, and I probably could see that being easier to maintain those kids for. I don't know. I mean, it certainly works for something like Marvel, which it gets the comment a lot of the time that it's operating more like TV than movies. But Marvel also always had this. Maybe if they started introducing some suggestion of a direction, because even Marvel's got the suggestion of Endgame at all times. Like there's something cumulative that getting these separate stories like that's there's the investment of the season finale, even within that movie franchise. That these people will come together, they will fight the big threat, they will turn to dust and then come back from dust. And, I could see if Stranger Things just, I guess, right now, I'll be very curious what season 3 is and what kind of it's suggesting overall for the direction of it, because it kind of just feels like they're looking for 80s-ish things to do with these kids. But if they found if they're trying to solve some inherent mystery, like what something about 11 and what all those kid projects are, maybe. But the threat of all that to say, maybe. I don't know, man. That does sound like it could work, but I feel like people are too hungry for something different too regularly.
I feel like, yeah, it is big maybe, but I think the point I'm trying to get at more than anything is these characters, or at least this model, maybe it works just to introduce it, like this is something that we want to do, and you might end up killing Stranger Things for this, but introducing a new way for Netflix to come out with their new big show. This is a big epic show, something like Game of Thrones, something like The Walking Dead, a niche product that we think people are going to gravitate towards. And for Netflix, it's like, well, if we treat it like a movie, if we treat the next big thing that we want to do like this as a movie, and we get 50 million people watching in a month, something like that, or something of the ilk, like 50 million people, and they're tuning in next month to see the next episode movie, that's something that can sustain itself, and something that would allow Netflix to dominate the news media for longer than, as you said, like a weekend or maybe a month even. I mean, people, it's not that it did end just very like it ended like a week ago, yeah, but people are still talking about Game of Thrones. We've been talking about Game of Thrones for the last 2 or 3 months. The build up, the hype, everybody wanting to, and then, like you said, almost every single day of every single week that it was on, what's new to be mad about? How are we going to watch this even more? Like it's
God forbid be about, but
what is it going to be about? Yeah, like, and that's the biggest problem, I think, honestly, is that when it comes to Netflix and anything that they can put out there, there's just not the strange enough, there's just not the distribution model. I think kills anything that they put out there too quickly, and they don't care. They spend so much, they want to dominate content so much, they don't care about runaway successes as much as you would imagine something like HBO or anything else. I'm not sure if that's sustainable or whether it's the best alternative that they can put out there.
I don't know, because even when I think of marketing for Netflix shows, and I'd be happy to move on from Netflix because I know they're just one example, even though they're kind of the example right now. But I don't really like, even when they market their stuff well, it's kind of a similar flash in the pan sort of thing. Like I feel like I rarely know when a Netflix show is coming, or like even what new shows they have on their slate, and then next thing you know, bam, here it is, and then bam, the conversation's happening, and I don't know, the Game of Thrones literally like barely had to show anything, and they just could release a poster or a date, and it's like, and I know they do that, and I know Stranger Things in particular has done that, but they haven't had content do that, at least in a way that popped into my bubble personally. Maybe I'm missing something.
I'm going to use that as a way to kind of segue back into HBO. Because as you mentioned at the very beginning here, talking about HBO and them trying to sell all the stuff that they can in order to make people keep their subscription, or at least forget that they had it till their next big show hits. I think the biggest conversation pieces with them is Watchmen and what's the polar bear? The golden compass,
Yeah, the his dark materials or something.
something like that. Like those are the biggest things that they have to offer, and unlike Stranger Things, pretty much unlike anything that you can find on Netflix, those are two properties that have source material in the same way that Game of Thrones did, in the same way that Walking Dead did. There's something to build off there. There's a pre-established audience, and there's a direction ever at the very beginning. You kind of know where they're going, and you want to see how they adapt it or what they're doing with it. And I feel like that's one of the reasons I'm more excited to watch The Watchmen than almost anything else right now. I mean, like, it looks interesting.
Yeah.
It looks different than anything that you've seen about The Watchmen, including the comic books and Zack Snyder's movie. And even though I'm not a huge fan of The Leftovers, I felt like it was a vast improvement on Lost. So it's possible that it's going
Big
to.
Leftovers fan here.
I know. Well, yeah, like that's why I want you to talk a little bit. Do you know? I mean, I don't know if you know anything about it, but do you feel like that is something, or is it just is there a point where you're like, okay, this is too weird to be huge?
Um, I don't think. Well, one, I got the impression that that Watchmen series was going to be like like a season. I mean, maybe that's incorrect, but I got the impression that this was just going to be a mini series sort of deal.
Uh-huh.
They've been very like, because originally like they just announced it and they just did a pilot, which at this point like Damon Lindelof needing to. I'm surprised whenever Damon Lindelof doesn't just get a series right to greenlit right away, but he was apprehensive, I think, of doing that with this material. But now it's a season. It looks great. I think never say never, but I don't imagine that's going to be the next thing, even though I think it's going to be great. And his Dark Materials could be. I've heard that that's a great series. I really don't know anything about it, but it also feels like so close to the vein of Game of Thrones, and like I just feel like that nothing against the people making the show or the material, because I'm sure it stands on its own, but like it feels like the show that is very much trying to grab the torch from their last Juggernaut, and rarely just following the numbers like that work in that way. So I don't know. Something tells me his Dark Materials could be great and still not be doing that kind of business.
But it is actually really interesting because I don't know much about it, but I do believe it's based off of the same context that Golden Compass was, or at least the same book series. And I remember the Golden Compass came out and they thought it was going to be the next Harry Potter, and now we're talking about it being the next Game of Thrones. And those are not, I mean, they're fantasy worlds really, but they're not in the same vein at all.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people say that they're trying to jump on it. They're trying to use the CGI animals, the character-driven narrative and stuff. And you even hear, like talking about that particular story, that book series and everything that it comes with. You also, in the same time, have Amazon Prime secretly, but putting a lot of resources into making a Lord of the Rings television show. At the same time, you have this, I think Netflix is doing a Narnia series.
Really?
A Narnia series that's both movies and television shows, from what I've read. And it's exactly what you're saying. Those are great book series. At least the Lord of the Rings and Narnia. I used to love all of it. But first of all, Lord of the Rings has kind of been done to death. I don't know how much story is left to tell or what you would do with it. And then at the same time, you would have to have Narnia kind of crashed and burned at Disney. There might be a way to salvage that, make it a good television series or series and movies and everything that they do, but it seems like it's trying so hard to capture that Game of Thrones nostalgia and that Game of Thrones void that it might just be so close that it's not worth watching or paying attention to.
And the fact that all these different services are doing their kind of clear Game of Thrones swing, like they're going to be competing all at the same time. I just feel like it's going to be like, which not Game of Thrones show are you watching right now? And no one's going to agree. And all these shows could be great. But yeah, I think always something kind of has to come out of nowhere. Like you don't chase the crown, the king emerges sort of thing.
And that's the big question, right?
You don't expect Bran, you just get Bran.
And it's broken by the end, but it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it was always broken and we just couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I really agree, and that's one of the reasons I don't think that any of those shows are going to be the next king. I don't think first and foremost, I really don't think, even though it's probably their time in the sun, that anything on Amazon Prime, even if it's Lord of the Rings and they're putting all the money towards it, just the way that series is, I just can't imagine it pulling in people, numbers, everything. And it's crazy too, because like a lot of people do have Amazon Prime for the shipping, not so much for the video streaming service. So maybe if enough people are driven to it, they'll go and they'll watch. But I just don't imagine, even with the name recognition, that it's going to be that show itself is going to be anything huge or anything close to what they're expecting. Same thing with Narnia. It's possible. I mean, really, it's possible that the next Game of Thrones is just the Game of Thrones prequel that they're doing with Naomi Watts. That would be interesting, but you gotta ask: did Game of Thrones ruin Game of Thrones for itself?
In terms of that Naomi Watts show,
yeah.
Sorry, I might start getting a whole bunch. Do you know how to turn off the dings in your? This is not something to worry about. I will figure it out.
I'm not really sure.
Oh, maybe that'll do it. Sound effects. Okay. So what I'd say to that is, one, I think Game of Thrones alienated its audience towards the end a little bit. Not like in that last season, but in its last note, clearly a large percent of that audience was frustrated or unhappy. Mm-hmm. So I think that whatever new Game of Thrones thing there's going to be is going to, have to build off of that, like that crumph from the fan base. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, it also will not be as fresh as new. That's a great world that people clearly love, and I'm going to absolutely watch Naomi Watts in that universe, get her head cut off at some point, or whatever they're going to do with her.
I think she's a Lannister. I from what I've read. I mean, the whole thing is it's supposed to be a prequel, and they're going to build off and show where all the families came from.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Ooh. Is there going to be any tie into this, the main narrative, or is it
Everyone's thinking that it's going to try to explain who the Night King is at some point. And what his motivations were.
Yeah, he should have had some.
But I think there's a lot that can be explained and built upon in that series. I think it's interesting, this concept of prequels and people adapting shows, or at least trying to hold on to audiences in narratives that they were already comfortable with and wanting to watch more of. And as I said earlier, this whole concept of niche marketing or niche entertainment. People are comfortable with the things that they watched and the things that they want to continue watching. So you have AMC, I feel like, is the biggest pusher on this, especially with cable scripted television shows going, you like Breaking Bad, then you can watch Better Call Saul. If you like The Walking Dead, here's Fear the Walking Dead. Not only that, but you also have the Rick Grimes movies, and we're doing a third Walking Dead television show because
Rick Grimes is getting a fucking movie?
Trilogy.
Oh my god. What does this fandom want for...
So
I'm sorry. Walking Dead.
I do, but my point is like, I think first I think that's brilliant because, and I think that's brilliant. I think that's why HBO is not really ready or willing to give up on Game of Thrones or Game of Thrones just yet, and why they've had at the most 5 series in development, even though they've seemingly axed 2 of them, and now they have this one in production and 2 more in the works, because people like what they like, and because there's so much content, because there's just so much going out there. You need to watch this, you need to watch this, oh my gosh, have you seen this? It's easier just to continue watching the thing that you like and stay in that universe. I'm sure yeah.
Sorry, yeah,
No, you're fine.
Well, really finish your thought, because I know what I'm going to say to that.
I was just saying that, even though AMC is still a juggernaut, The Walking Dead, even though it's waning in popularity, it's probably 1/4 of its peak in terms of people viewing it, at least live. It's still crushing every single night that it's on. It makes sense financially for them to continue it. The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead both do really well, even though it doesn't look like it and people don't report on it like that. It's the most successful thing on television consistently. And it makes sense. So people jump in, they watch more of it, they want this stuff. It makes sense to me that Game of Thrones and HBO knows, or at least has a feeling that maybe the next Game of Thrones is just Game of Thrones.
Yes. I think what is smart to all this is these properties becoming brands in a way that, like... Sorry, let me find this thought. I don't think Game of Thrones will ever have the peak that Game of Thrones had again. And I don't know the numbers for this, but I'd be curious if any prequel installment has ever surpassed the numbers of its original story. Even when successful, like, I think what these things do that are smart are they widen the pool, so to speak. Like, you make this world richer, you tell more stories within it. None of the stories capture the zeitgeist or excitement in the same way, or the conversation in the same way, but all the properties benefit from that. Like, if you're getting your prequel series of Game of Thrones, like, Game of Thrones is going to inevitably get more people going to that. It could get a new base. Like, there's new base constantly coming in. That's something I felt when Better Call Saul came out. Is like, I love that show, and in some ways I think it's a more mature show than Breaking Bad, but Breaking Bad easily had the highs. It's just like the dramatic, edge of your seat highs, and that's not even the type of story that Better Call Saul really is aiming to be. But I'm just to say, like, these properties, I feel, reach the peak of their enthusiasm in that main narrative, and then it's just about, like, making the theme park, which sounds cynical, but
it's true.
Priority. I think if the question is what's going to inherit the throne for Game of Thrones in terms of, like, the heights, I don't think any of the things we've listed will be that, because they are just too connected to some other type of success. And I feel like people are just constantly, like, the next big thing needs a bit of discovery to it, because people just like to find. But maybe the notion of what success is, like, that's its own conversation. Like, maybe the objective of these streaming services, these networks, are something different than that flash moment, but rather that sustainability of the property. Is
Yeah,
that
no, it I think that's true. I want to just kind of briefly go back and talk about Better Call Saul just for a moment.
uh-huh.
I no, Better Call Saul is not going to be the next big thing, but I do think it does show, and this kind of goes to the broader topic that I want to get to eventually, but I do think it goes to show that you can explore this world, you can make it much more rich, and I think you can build something more quality depending on who's writing it and everything. I personally think the longer it's gone on, Better Call Saul is a better show than Breaking Bad. And I know a lot of
Well,
people would think that's blasphemy, but it's very well put together, obviously very well thought out, and it makes it watching it is surprising because you have an idea of where it's going to go, like any prequel will be, but you don't understand, you don't know exactly how you're going to get to point A to point B. You don't know who's all going to be involved and what the decisions are going to be. So it's still intriguing, and it has that air of mystery about what's happening in the future or when does that take place. So that's always been one of my favorite things for that television series, but it's never going to be as big as Breaking Bad. Like you said,
yeah.
you're not dealing with a character like Walter White. You're not dealing with a story like Walter White. You're dealing with a much more, and I think darker character who, even though Walter was a bad, like a nice guy turned bad, realized that he liked it and started doing that. You have Jimmy McGill, who I think is just a bad guy all around, trying to be a good guy and realizing that nope, I'm just gonna embrace me because that's who I am.
I that's
You don't think?
that's a darker read than I would give it. I think I don't know. I'd have to find the thought, but I don't write Jimmy off as being he was a bad thing, but rather circumstances ruined good intention, like a genuinely good intention person. Like a very interesting world versus man universe. The Breaking Bad universe is.
But at the same time, but this like goes to my larger point. Even though you have these stories and it's building off, Fear the Walking Dead has its highs, at least in my opinion, and has its massive lows. It's basically that show is the entire spectrum of The Walking Dead. It's the best of the best, and it's the worst of the worst, and somewhere in between. But they're still pushing forward with it. People are still involved with it. They watch The Walking Dead. Far less of them watch Fear the Walking Dead, but there's a big enough audience to make it AMC's second highest rated show, above Better Call Saul and above anything else that they put out there, and the fourth highest all around scripted television show I think last year. So that's insane. Like that's kind of insane to me, and it's one of the reasons they're doing the Rick Grimes movies. It's one of the reasons they're doing the 3 television shows. Breaking Bad is still successful enough as a franchise and a universe. With that, we want to continue it, see it going to the point where Vince Gilligan is talking about maybe potentially doing a 3rd spinoff after this, and they're doing that.
Sounds like that's happening. It's not a maybe.
You think? For what?
It seems like they're going with that Jesse Pinkman movie.
Well, that's a movie. I'm talking about more of a spinoff, like with Kim's character, or maybe even Gus Fring, somebody.
Maybe. Every time I hear that they're going back into that well, it's like, oh, great. But then they do a good job, so I'll cross my arms and then watch it until they fuck it up, which they haven't yet. Yes. Yes. No. And you know what? Like Walking Dead and what you've listed, like I only watched the first couple seasons of that show. I was never a big fan of it. But you are speaking to like something that's very much a blind spot, because like those numbers are crazy, and that base clearly is coming out for that. And even though it doesn't register for me at all. Clearly, that is still doing its business. Is it still at the height of its numbers, or is it the consistent like
at its height? It was doing about a little less, but about what Game of Thrones did this season.
which is crazy.
which is like
Uh,
which is tens of millions of people watching every Sunday night. No, it's fallen. Like I said, it's fallen. It's been slashed into like a fourth. How crazy is that? Like that's the biggest thing here, because there's so few people who watch television these days.
mm,
Live television, especially your network, your biggest show ever can have be sliced into a fourth of its past glory, and still dominate everything that airs on the same date, other than special events like sporting events or big award ceremonies or something else like that. I mean, it used to destroy those things, but now it doesn't. And then
right.
after about 7 days, The Walking Dead still pulls in like with back people like DVR ratings and stuff. The Walking Dead still will pull in about 7 million people in a week.
Mm,
I mean, and its closest competition is like 2 million every Sunday. So it's still doing well, and that's like, and everyone reports, oh, it is like, oh, series low, and then like AMC comes out and it's like, we still have a lot of confidence in this because look at this, like look at the numbers before you start telling us that this is bad. uh and I think you're right that, and it's kind of crazy that you have AMC, seemingly HBO, maybe even uh all these other streaming networks going, okay, we need to keep this. I mean, I think before even Disney Plus, with all of its MCU shows and Star Wars content that they want to create, it's niche material that they already know people are showing up for in one form or another, with one television show or another, or movie franchise or something. They go, okay, this is clearly selling, so it's easier for us to sell. And it doesn't have to dominate so much as it pulls a certain segment of the audience to watch this or buy this streaming service or something. And at the same time,
right.
because all of these networks are doing this and everyone's trying to split off and be their own thing, revivals, all this other stuff, television itself is waning. People watching television, it's still sustainable, sure, at least at this point, but talking about, and, and not even talking about quality, just talking about numbers and people coming in, and whether or not anything can reach the social heights of Game of Thrones again, or this. Oh my god, did you see, don't spoil me, you need to see the next
Mm,
episode. Oh my god, did you watch it last night? you know Game of Thrones doesn't pull in that much people in comparison to how many people used to watch television a decade ago, or 2 decades ago, or 3 decades ago, because
right.
because there's so much more material out there. There's so much segmenting of interests and niche marketing and everything that, who knows? I always thought it was really interesting that the two biggest television scripted television, or the biggest television shows, scripted cable dramas of the last decade, are two very nerd friendly television shows: The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones. And
Mm,
I'm wondering if it's strange, but I'm wondering if that's because they are what they are, because Game of Thrones is Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead is The Walking Dead. There's enough people who are seemingly interested in it, but it's not the vast majority of the population or the worldwide population who watch it. So we watch it, we understand it, we talk about it, and we can nerd out about it amongst ourselves. And then you realize that the people who you wouldn't talk to or anything, you didn't think like this, that, or the other, you realize they do in social situations, and it gives you a reason to talk about them. It becomes the water cooler talking television show for a very long time. I don't know. In both numbers and something, the next king has to rise to the top and be its own thing. I'm not
mm.
sure. You're right. I'm not sure it's out there yet. I don't think it's even in development, or we can even judge it, call it at this point. And I don't even think it's going to be as big as the Walking Dead or Game of Thrones was. I don't think we're going to see the next big show be that big.
Bro, do you think something is ever going to be that, as in like nothing will be that big again, or just like the next big thing we're obsessed with will be to a slightly smaller degree?
I think to a slightly smaller degree. It's possible that it's going to be that big, but I mean, think of it this way: 20 million people watched live, or near 20 million people watched live Game of Thrones ending. about 10 million people watched Breaking Bad. And Breaking Bad had years of hype and build up and everything on Netflix, people catching up to the end and everything. Yes, it's a completely different show, but Game of Thrones started big. It built big, and then it ended kind of on a sour note for people.
But still, numbers wise, like
it was big. Yeah, it was big. But it's the biggest thing that HBO has ever had, so it's possible that people do it. But that's still like almost a decade worth of build up and story and fan goodwill and people subscribing just so they could watch it and just everything related to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you have any guesses what it might be? What anything you want to be? Anything
I want to talk so we've talked about Amazon Prime as much as we can. We took a while on Netflix because they just seem like the biggest player right now in terms of this. Didn't really spend any time on any other cable news shows or cable networks besides maybe AMC and HBO.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk briefly. We've been going here for about an hour. We don't have to keep this going much longer, but I want to talk briefly and get your thoughts on Disney Plus. The MCU and Star Wars shows. What?
I'm very scared of the mouse.
I think the reason I want to talk about it is because I think if anything's going to dominate in terms of must-watch television or ratings or something, it's going to be something off that network next. I just think Disney has too much invested to not just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
They have the money.
Yeah,
they almost have the money to assure to assure something.
I mean, this next Star Wars television show, the Mandalorian. It has
the mandolin.
The mandolin.
Yeah.
It has Jon Favreau directing it. I mean, or putting it together.
Mm-hmm.
The go-to poster boy for everything MCU and reinterpretation of.
Hit those swingers fans where it hurts. Sorry, that's my biggest. They haven't shown anything except stills from that, but everyone that saw the trailer they showed at like DisneyCon or whatever Disney shows their stuff at,
mm-hmm.
everyone was like, the effects are next level,
mm-hmm.
which it doesn't surprise me at all. Like, if anyone can throw a budget to push the expectations of a medium, it would be the most powerful conglomerate in Hollywood. I'm a couple of things. The Mandalorian. The Mandela
effect.
Yeah. It's gonna take me a couple of trailers to get that name right. One, Star Wars narratives seem to kind of go on old samurai narratives, which, like, is this kind of a bounty hunter? Like, I wander into a town, I do my mission. Like, is it a little more episodic, or does it have an overarching thing? Because if it's like episodic, I feel like that's gonna be a little. It might. Again, it might be a Stranger Things type example where, like, it's the water cooler talk is got the longevity of a movie rather than, like, where's the Mandela gonna be going next.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just don't know enough about what that show is. But I think it will certainly be event television, and it's the thing that clearly they want to put forward that gets everyone onto that app, which I think is probably going to succeed because you never underestimate Star Wars. And yeah, but we already have our relationships to Star Wars. We already have our relationships to the Marvel Universe, and I feel like, again, that's going to be how much of a surprise can any of those be to the people? Like, we will go to it, but will we be? Will it? Will it do anything to what our expectations that they've already set for like decades now
Hmm.
already on these properties?
And I
I
think,
don't.
yeah,
I'm skeptical.
yeah,
Not won't be huge, but yeah.
yeah. And that's the thing though. Like, yes, you could be skeptical, but I mean, with the Mandalorian, I think is the more interesting because one, we've seen something. I've seen parts of it. I've seen that trailer.
Oh, is it out?
I think so. Yeah.
What?
So
Like publicly or like in your dark web?
I'm not sure. It was on YouTube. I saw it on YouTube, so I'm not sure if they put it out there. From what I saw, it looked amazing. But I'm wondering if it's going to do well because it might be seen as a redemption arc for Star Wars in a time where people are bagging on this series a lot. This is something completely new, original to its own thing, and it comes in. This is why we love Star Wars, and people won't stop talking about it. This is what Star Wars needs to be. They've saved it. The next coming or whatever it's going to be,
Mm.
and a redemption arc from what Ryan Johnson did, like it or not, with the fandom in Star Wars after The Last Jedi. MCU, yeah, we have our connections. We love that content. It is what it is. But I agree with Fox and Disney, everything that they can put to that streaming network, and the fact that it's going to be half the price of Netflix.
Mhm.
Everyone's going to get it. I'm afraid of the House of Mouse doing their own streaming network and something that they want to put, uh, because one, they'll throw everything. They'll bury Netflix with money if they have to. They'll
Uh-huh.
charge less. They'll charge less. And I'm just really afraid because one of the reasons media, or at least home release media, which I'm a fan of,
Mm.
is still in business and people still like it is because of Disney. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to do this. I think that this would be kind of a terrible, oh my god, what kind of power have we allowed move, but it's possible that Disney goes, screw, fuck the Disney Vault. Everything's going to be on this streaming network from now on, and you can come on here and you can watch Frozen 2, you can watch Endgame, you can watch The Rise of the Skywalker, all of it,
Such a
uh,
stupid title.
all of it without uh, without having to go out and buy it and just pay your $6 a month, and you're never allowed to own anything again. That will help the death of physical media, and it would change the way that we watch everything. So they could do that to get more people to watch these television shows, or at least subscribe to the point where they're going to watch these television shows. And Disney is going to kill us with what we want the most, which is content that we're dying to see and talk about, but everything else suffers in comparison. That's my biggest fear here.
Uh, it's so plausible. It's so yeah. I'm very scared. I don't know who said it, or maybe it's just a general given thing, but like whenever a technology is pushed, old media gets lost.
Mhm.
And I think we're very much like with these streaming wars that are about to happen. And again, like Netflix, who's been a juggernaut in this, has not really seen a competitor that could go dollar to dollar with them like
Mhm.
they're about to see. Uh, yes, I'm very sad for a lot of like film history. We're probably going to be losing, and
Or just interactions or content. I mean, we're going to be losing. I'm not saying they're not going to do this. I feel like Netflix, Disney Plus, somebody should do this where they do commentaries and special features on the streaming service, but it's not going to be the same.
no.
It's not going to be the same, and you're not going to be able to own anything, and that's going to be the biggest issue. And it's kind of crazy that a discussion that's about what's going to be the next big juggernaut on television might end up because of Disney, because of these streaming wars, and because of the segment, the the dividing of our popular culture and what people want and will continue to watch, might end up meaning less options, even though there's so much that we can't possibly digest it all.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
and Apple, we didn't even talk about Apple Plus. Granted, I don't know what the fuck Apple Plus has got
God,
coming. I think Apple might actually like.
I don't think Apple knows.
But you know what? They're gonna. They got Spielberg. They got JJ. They got a bunch of white people. You know what? Like a big factor that we didn't really touch on is like whatever show Black Twitter gets on is going to be the one that it is. I'm not even kidding. Like the majority of viral content, that is where it's generated, and that's where that conversation permeates. So, which makes me think that really, like, look for a show that is actually going to have some inclusivity, which is something that Game of Thrones definitely got criticized for, and like, I feel like people are looking for the next big thing to have that example. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I feel us wrapping up, so I'm trying to think of like any last point. You know, a show I was trying to think, because when you pitched me this idea, I was trying to think of like any show that I wasn't thinking of that could be good. Good answer. I'm hoping FX's Why the Last Man series comes out really well. That's been something that's been like on the table for a while, and finally it seems like the pieces have come together, and they got Diane Lane and Barry Keoghan, who are two great actors, and that is just a phenomenal source material. And I feel like it's a different strand than a lot of the examples we mentioned before, because like they each had a little like their fingers in fantasy pies. Like I think something sci-fi I could see, a version of sci-fi, a version of a dystopian world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that could be different enough that like there's that discovery there for people. I just hope it's good. I hope whatever the next big thing is, that it's actually good and not just popular.
It does feel like, even as I am a fan of the big things from time to time, it is a big problem. We started out this conversation with kind of a lengthy discussion of Stranger Things, even though I think both of us agree and believe that that's not nearly going to be the biggest thing. But I got into that thought that Stranger Things, especially in season 2, was popular for being popular, and the quality dropped. I understand like what they were trying to do with it, and I appreciated it, but to me, with that second season, especially what episode 6 was it, where they decided that we finally need like a direction for the sequel or for the next part, and everyone hates that. It just dropped the ball.
Oh yeah, I haven't heard a single person say, "Oh, that episode where they did something else, loved it."
and that scares me, and everyone I've talked to, it scares them about the future of the series. It's like they had a pilot for season 3 and season 2, and everyone's like, no, let's just keep with like what works. But we're gonna have to wait and see. Why the Last Man is an interesting choice, and it would be really cool to see them play that hand and make it a good show. It's been a long time since, and strangely enough, it's besides HBO, I feel like these dominating forces it's like cyclical, or not even that. It's just like, okay, here's your turn. It's your turn now. Back in the day, FX had a gigantic hit in terms of cultural relevance and stuff with Nip Tuck, and then it also had it has American Horror Story and everything, yeah. And so those shows, even though it's successful and people talk about them, it's not burning up the media. It's not something that everyone's talking about. It doesn't change television forever. Same
No,
thing with
probably not.
Showtime and Dexter. Like ever since Dexter, like Showtime, even though their series are popular, it doesn't have anything. HBO's had Game of Thrones and The Sopranos. Those are the only two. It's the only network I can think of that has two shows after decades long where like they come back and like they revolutionize television again in terms of what people want, expect, or it changes like the next level in terms of what is possible to make on television, what's possible to tell as a story. Even I guess you could say House of Cards was a way for Netflix to kind of drop the mic when they first came on board, but they haven't had anything since besides I guess Stranger Things in a big way.
I think you mean Lilyhammer.
I know, but that's I mean it was like a co-production and
Juggernaut, that was Lilyhammer.
it wasn't their first. It was a co-production, and they did not treat it as such. They treated Lilyhammer like they treat almost everything else these days, where it's like it's just there if you want to watch it. They made a big deal about House of Cards, and they made a big deal about Orange is the New Black.
Yeah,
and I think those succeeded in part because of that. But in Hemlock Groves, no one remembers Hemlock Groves besides me.
I'm supposed to Hemlock Groves.
Say what?
I remember that hand coming out of the wolf's mouth.
and so, no, and that's what I said. Like, yeah, maybe it's something on like if it's coming out of nowhere, maybe it's something on Prime. Maybe it can be Lord of the Rings. I mean, people are attached to that. Maybe it's. I don't think HBO has anything in the cards that it's going to blow up anyway. I didn't even really want to talk about Apple because everything I've seen from that whole panel they put up there was just the worst. But
they didn't show anything, right? They didn't actually show any new material.
No, they just announced a bunch of names. Like, oh, this, and this, these people.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think Disney, and I think Disney just because Disney, maybe Star Wars, maybe something in the MCU or whatever, or just something they put up there just to see what sticks. But it's going to be interesting to see how what comes out of nowhere and sucker punches us. And it could be tomorrow, it could be next year, 2 years from now or something. It could be in 2020, early 2020, and be the thing that dominates television for 10 years. But yeah, it's going to come out of nowhere, and I don't think it's going to hit as hard or in the exact same way as Game of Thrones did, you know?
Probably not.
Anyway.
Yeah.
No, anything you want to say or closing words or thoughts of what I just said?
I think everything you said was pretty on. I guess my closing sentiments are pay attention to the shows with casts we don't have attachments to, because I think that's usually a big thing. I think, like you think of Game of Thrones, you think of those kids, you think of a lot of character actors that it's easier for us to put our investment into them by the name of these characters because that's the first time we're really getting an impression of them. Mm-hmm. And I think that helps just, that helps the investment as it moves forward. And then on top of that, I hope it is something original, not even necessarily original in terms of it comes completely without source material, but I am not rooting for it to be the man. What the fuck is it called? Mark the Mandolin? The
Mandalorian.
Yeah. Welcome to Morrowind. I don't want it to be that because I don't want audiences to. If they're right that you can drive people to what they've had and you can make it that level of success that it needs to be, that is only going to make precedence for that. So I am rooting for something good, something unexpected, something different.
So, not The Mandalorian, none of the MCU shows,
Not personally.
not Lord of the Rings, not
No.
Narnia or anything. Just something.
His Dark Materials I'd be open to, but again, like, and I will watch. I'm a complete hypocrite. I will watch all these things, but I am not I am not any example to follow. And I hope, and what my hope is that the zeitgeist can't be predicted that easily.
I agree, and part of me, I think you're right, is it can't be. I think you can sell, and I think you can sell things to be profitable, sustainable, but the reason Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead blew up in terms of like the last decade is, yes, they had source material, yes, people knew about them, and they could be predicted even though they weren't adapting full sail. It's this thing where you've never heard of it. Whether you've heard of it or not, you've probably never heard of it, and you don't know what's going on. You don't know how it's going to continue. You don't know who's going to die or what's going to come of these characters, this story, and it's progressing in such a way where it wasn't something that you knew before. It's just something completely out of the Walking Dead is a show about a zombie apocalypse that never ends. Like, that's something that's like, oh, that's interesting. I'm gonna watch that. Game of Thrones is Lord of the Rings, but with boobs. I mean, like, that's not fair. But
It's Lord of the Rings with taxes, Mark.
it is, but that's one of the reasons those things blew up. Is they're different, they're new, they're original, they're not something that you knew before. And I think you're right. If I want to see The Mandalorian, it's something that we're picking on a lot, but I want to see that show. But at the same time, it's like, it's Star Wars. I'm not a huge fan of Star Wars. I'm kind of a casual.
Right.
Anyway,
it's as good as it is good.
I keep trying to. We'll talk. We'll talk for hours if we do, guys.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put Matt's link to his Twitter in the description. You should go follow him. He's funny on Twitter, so definitely go check him out.
Sure. Anyone that follows, I guarantee nothing.
Don't guarantee anybody anything. At least.
But thank you very much for checking me out if you do.
So yeah, this is gonna go up on this channel. Like I said, complete live stream channel. I would love to have Matt back on here if he had at least a fun time. Maybe I bored him to death for the last hour.
And I'm glad I just got to talk with you for like an hour plus.
We'll talk a little bit after this. After I jump off, we'll talk about what you wanted to talk about the other week that I kind of blew you off on. Anyway, I really like this. I want to keep doing this. I feel like this would be kind of a nice, fun channel to work on, especially when I'm studying for the bar. So expect more on this. Subscribe to this channel if you're new, or if you know about any of my other channels and want to just, whenever hear my random thoughts about anything and scheduled portions and interact with me. The point of this channel is to talk, unlike this one, because not a lot of people are here. Didn't expect a lot of people to show up, but it is what it is. The point of this is to come on here with things to talk about, ideas, and then get to comments. So share your comments next time you're here, and we'll have fun talking about that. With that being said, guys, I hope everyone's having a fantastic day. It's been real.